So this is a video that describes the context of the PlaySalo experiments running from 2017 to 19. It's part of two videos. So one is about the context, that's the one we are doing now. The other one is about the game itself, which was done in the spring 2019. So the background for the collaboration between you, Pano, and me was a meeting, a conference in this wonderful building. It's the ETH campus in Zurich, and it was a conference called Beyond Lefebvre in 2009. I was there because especially a colleague of mine, Jan Liljendal Larsen, was presenting a paper on how we worked in Copenhagen and how it related to Lefebvre, and especially promoting a concept of vague spaces, both vague in a physical urban sense, but also in a semantic sense, that it had this openness for something new to emerge in these vague spaces. Pano, what was the paper you presented?
I was there. I'd done my PhD on social production of urban space, very much inspired by Lefebvre's work. I was also tutored by Mark Gordiner, and at the time when we met in this conference in Zurich, I was working with the notion of experiential urbanism, with an effort to rethink how we act as urbanists and architects. I published a text in Critical Sociology 2012, and there, for example, I was writing about space being complex and polyvalent, providing the humus for surprising phenomena, something that's helping radical social and societal change. I was also interested in the everyday uses of urban space, making space active and even rebellious or insurgent, as was discussed at the time. I also knew Christian Schmid, who was one of the co-organizers of that conference in Zurich, and Schmid had done this big German-speaking volume on Lefebvre's philosophy and thought, where Christian raised, amongst other things, the critique of abstract thought, Lefebvre foregrounding social practices, and then kind of rethinking Marx in a spatial way. There's this very nice quote from Schmid's work where he says that a painter, for example, could not develop his skills and awareness without actually painting. Painting is not a pretext or an arbitrary manifestation of some kind of talent, but its source. So basically, you have to do things concretely, and also space can only be understood in its production, in doing it. And I think that's quite important for our collaboration and this PlaySalo. You have to do things concretely. You have to experiment in real places, real situations. At the time, I was also interested in temporary uses. There was this urban catalyst project, and temporary uses as a tool for open experiments for steering the city.
Yeah. Then at the time, we were also very much as a network in Copenhagen called Supertanker, involved in temporary use, especially the harbor area of Copenhagen. But I show this slide because we got engaged as a network to work with urban regeneration in these social housing areas with problems of crime and youth, which are unhappy, combined with too much energy. And I show this slide because it's important for us to understand this role of who you are to go into such an area. And in this case, it was some large urban renewal, urban social regeneration programs paid for by the municipality and by a large foundation linked to the social housing. And we would always have this role as somebody coming from the municipality. In this case, it was a problem. It's difficult to be totally independent, but maybe the point here is to be multi-dependent. And it was the background to move towards involving educational institutions as maybe more, let's say, independent actor in working with the urban. We did lots of workshops with students, so we were closely working with universities, in this case Roskilde University, especially in outside Copenhagen. But this was the idea that I came with to you, Pano, to involve educational institutions, universities more directly in urban development. And that kind of led to our first ideas for the Urban Education Live project.
Yes, that's true. We did a couple of applications, and then this Urban Education Live with the JPE was successful. That's true. Supertanker was quite known, by the way, at the time. I knew it. Yes.
Mm. And that brought us to Salo. The picture here shows the remnants of the McDonald's restaurant in the city of Salo in Finland. Of course, we don't see any building or even the pavement has been taken away, but still they left these fences and bushes and the flagpoles. Maybe Pano, you say a little bit more about Salo.
Yes, Salo is interesting city. It's a small town between Helsinki, the capital, and Turku, one of the biggest cities of Finland in southern Finland. And it's quite peripheral in certain way, but it became famous because of Nokia. It's the starting place of the mobile phone production. It has long history in making radios and televisions and so forth. And then when Nokia shifted its operations in late 80s from paper, etc., to digital, they bought a company in Salo that became then the mobile phone branch of Nokia. And Salo became, during 1990s, especially early 2000s, very, very booming city with thousands and thousands of engineers, and also big production plant of Nokia, which then collapsed in 2010s. It just collapsed because of mistakes in Nokia, because of increased global competition. And Salo became a crisis town, a shrinking city with big problems. And of course, this McDonald's is concrete sign visible for youth, especially, that there is a glorious past and now problems. That's why we chose Salo as our test ground. I was also involved myself with a group in Salo who was working with a grain silo next to the railway station, trying to find new programs and appropriating this industrial building. It was an interesting place to work on.
Then we also experienced a great openness, institutional openness, let's say, from the local high school. So we started to experiment with, especially in close collaboration with the artist teacher at the high school. So in early 2017, we did a 3-week experiment. The first week we did this mapping that we can see here. We used Twitter to record the observations and the images of the students, and it would sort of do this kind of tag clouds, geotag clouds, that would show or sum up the observations of the students. The picture to the right is the wonderful, let's say, kind of ironic, the wonderful bus station in the big shopping center of Linjuri. It was this combination of bus station and shopping center. So this was the first week, was an exploration. The second week was a sort of looking into how this abandoned spaces, not only McDonald's, but many shops were empty, houses were empty. And what you see here is the leader to the right of the place called Ichma and Kumma. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but it's this social entrepreneur who came back to his birthplace of Salo to run this sort of enterprise with people with learning disabilities. They would have this thrift store, the radio station, a small restaurant, and really show how these empty, abandoned spaces also produce an openness for something new to happen. So that was kind of the second week.
Yes, and also how people with little capabilities can do new things. So there's also this capacity building quite much with Ihme and Kumma.
Yeah, exactly. And the third week, we asked the students not only to make a nice drawings, but also to really check how to do stuff. So they, for example, called the owner of this grain silo that you mentioned before, Pano, to check if they could make a climbing wall, or they checked how to get sponsorship for paint, you know. And in this case, what we see is a group of students who have a proposal for a youth club exactly in this Linjuri shopping center with this enormous, almost football field, big empty space. And they contacted the owner of this shopping center just to get the plans. In 3 weeks, but it was very limited because it was just the art classes.
Yes, and this is now the local high school students, not students of architecture. They're quite young.
No,
and I think they found new ideas and found new roles for themselves.
Because these experiments were really testing how far we could go with high school students, because one of the main ideas of the way we worked with Urban Education Live was this link between universities and local high schools. There was many good reasons for to do that, but we needed to test new pedagogical formats that could sort of make sure this link worked. So the high school students would learn more about the place they live, but also function as local experts for the university students. And that we show much more about in the other video I mentioned earlier. So we did a number of experiments more in Salo, developing a game, for example. But this 3-week first experiment showed very much how you explore, how you dream or get inspired to do something yourself, and then really go into how to do it, not just having good ideas, but how you, in this case, the high school students could actually do something. Then another experiment we did before we tried out the full game in 2019 was in 2018 in Venice. So a rather dramatic, beautiful, old, but also abandoned army barrack on Lido. So not the old part of Venice, but we worked together with these people who were sort of appropriating, inhabiting this empty, abandoned space as part of the Architecture Biennale in Venice. But they also had worked with the local high school. And so here we had a 2-week full-time workshop with only high school students. So here we had really a fantastic opportunity to test how far we could actually go with involving high school students in this link between universities and local high schools or educational institutions. So here we have the first introduction. We did again some explorations, like in the Salo test, but here we looked more for these sort of vague spaces, abandoned spaces on one hand, and then actually tried to do small interventions like these branches to, again, a little bit like this painter example you mentioned before, Pano, that you actually experience space by doing stuff there. And even in this very symbolic, simple way of doing stuff, this was a sign of a tent, sort of welcoming, especially at that time, the refugees was a big topic in Italy. We went on to do find places maybe less abandoned, more close to the central parts of Lido. They located an underused park and an empty shop right at the central part of the Lido. And here we worked very concretely. We tried to contact the local municipality or the owner of the shop to be allowed to do these interventions. They did posters to invite people to come. And here we see how they also put up signs to invite people. And for the park, they did a graffiti wall. They also did some having some snacks and drinks, but maybe more importantly was that they built these football goals that we transported to the park. And in the end, it was the high school students playing with the other young people in the park. And it became this very concrete intervention that changed the dynamic of the space in a matter of half an hour. So that was this very direct way of intervening. The other group didn't manage to get hold of the owner of the empty shop, a big developer in Milan. So instead, they just made drawings of what could happen in the shop, and they invited people to pass by and discuss the ideas for what could be done in this empty shop. And they were very much into doing something with young people. And the end result of this long workshop, 2 weeks full time, was that we could really go quite far with high school students, and they were extremely excited about getting this chance of doing stuff in this very concrete way. I don't know, Pano, if you have some comments.
Not at this stage. It's of course it's okay. Interesting to see, and also in that case, Lido not being the center of Venice, it shows something a bit more open, and I think there is something that we tried in all our experiments to find locations that are not so fixed, that are not so readily defined and open to new in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole Venice Laguna, if you see it as a whole, I mean, most people see this extremely intense tourist focus on the center of old part of Venice, but around that you have so much empty hospitals, empty like this army barracks. It's quite fascinating, and,
yes. And we had amazing time
sense,
yeah, we had amazing time with the boat there. It's fantastic to see Venice with your own boat.
Yeah,
it gives completely different view to the place.
Yeah, it's so this sort of openness with this, maybe not only these abandoned shops and old army barracks, but in general this openness or vague space was what was the similar sort of starting point, and both in a physical sense, but also in a theoretical sense in Venice and in Salo. Then, of course, we used a lot of these things for the game. As I said before, we have a video more focused on the game itself. So I will just show a few, or just one picture from there. It's the exploration of this, again, this Linuri shopping mall with the bus station in the background. Here you see to the left is the local high school students. who functioned as a guide, also so that the university student who is blindfolded doesn't fall or hurt herself. But also function, the high school student also writes down post-it notes to on the spots sort of record the observations.
Yes, I think it's important to stress this multi-sensory approach, that when you blindfold, then other senses become more important, and you start to hear more, you start to sense the wind and all these kind of things, and then the other was noting these experiential dimensions again.
Yeah, and this was sort of what we saw in the previous picture, was this first day before the game actually started. So it was this warming up and getting all the senses going, a little bit like when you eat a little chili to start your taste senses to work. I show this picture as some sort of kind of an end result. What we did in Salo was a 5-day full week, full-time game, but what we wanted to do but didn't have the time for was, again, actual physical interventions in public space. And it could have looked a little bit like what we see in this picture, with a long bench next to an abandoned old factory, and to the right, what you can't see is the local river. So it's actually quite a beautiful place, but underused. So by building this bench, you could kind of produce some sort of acupuncture dynamic that would take attention to this place and to this old factory building. But what we used these experiences, these 5 days, and this work of the students, was to arrange a symposium again in this old deserted, half-abandoned shopping mall, Linjuri, where we discussed with the students and with, for example, the director of the school, some of the planners of the city, how to take this kind of experiment, both the 5-day game, but also the previous experiments further. And I think this picture shows, to some degree, sums up quite well. The upper left corner is, we use these dots to vote, so we can see that this idea of school events outside, working in, with, and for the city is maybe the most important point. Also, if we see to the right of it, is this the courage to tell ideas and the courage to listen to them, this sort of feeling that you could actually change stuff if you want to. Then below that one is something in Finnish. Pano, maybe you take that one.
Yes. Matalan kynnyksen kokeileminen means experiments with low threshold, and I think that's quite important. It shows that the students really start to think spaces of possibility, spaces of new opportunities to change the city and their own life.
Yeah, so I think that it points very strongly to this idea of vague spaces, that it's this starting point for something new to happen, and maybe most importantly, that it's the kind of spaces that gives you this feeling that something is possible. You know, that this, let's say, courage to tell ideas, or if we look at the lower right corner, a more positive attitude, that actually creating these spaces with low thresholds is the first very sort of small step for something new to emerge.
And thinking this exactly, and thinking this interest in wake space, as Jens is saying, in the experiential urbanism. It's quite important to be sensitive to the atmosphere of the place, and of course atmosphere in the sense of what is approved, and I think these experiments, these games, they did show to students, both students of architecture and high school students, that there is possibilities, and you can change the place.
Yeah. So if we should sum up, of course, this was more like an experiment, this 5-day game that we were discussing in this symposium. It's one of the problems, let's say, is to connect it into the different rhythms of the different educational institutions. It was quite difficult to find the time for the high school students to be off full time. In the end, we did it so it counted in the same way as taking a study trip. So it would be a study trip to your own community, which was actually quite wonderful in a sense, and then to coordinate with having the university students at the same time for a full 1 week. That's something we definitely need to work on. Also, that it fits into other maybe more mainstream educational formats is quite clear, but then this kind of week of exploration needs to be in the beginning of a semester, let's say, or before you then start to work in let's say in the high school. This exploration could feed into studying a complex topic, let's say this empty shopping center, that could be studied in history, in economics, it could be studied in language. How do we communicate the ideas? That could be sort of standard topics in the high school, and maybe then based on this sort of exploration that we tested out with the game, and then this more traditional fragmented way of studying different aspects could then melt together again and be the basis for some concrete interventions in public space that we saw the students do in Venice, for example. And I don't know, the same is the case with the university students. I don't know, I guess that we tried to make the students go back and work on the projects and produce these drawings that we saw with the bench. But the main point would be that they actually took those ideas and did real interventions, again, together with the high school students.
Yes, I got very positive feedback from that group who was in Salo. We had this dynamic of situated, being there, and then mediated. There's other group who was in Tampere, following and doing different work, and those really were two different worlds. That's something we'll discuss in the UL final symposium 2020. Situated, mediated, doing and being on distance. There is certain interesting dialectic with that.
Okay, but I think that sums it up quite well. As I mentioned before, there is a video focused only on this 5-day game experiment in 2019. So this video is very much to be seen together with the other one.